child's play compared to what this is. You know, we would always hit that everything, and we would tell the assessors that we're going to have a millage increase in September after the year's over with. This year is so huge. I believe the mayor's correct that we need to really concentrate on the expenditures and just realize that the revenues are way out there. And then just a minute from the comp. And I certainly don't want it to get out that the city council and me in any way is supporting closing these businesses down.
Nobody's even saying that. Nobody's saying that. So
well, good. Gotta make sure it's clear. So you know, the revenues is just all over the place. You can't put a finger on it.
Well, so what we tried to do was, again, think about worst case scenario revenues and lay in expenditures, making cuts and deferrals as necessary so that we could get through the next 2 years with a worst case scenario revenue situation. And that's what this budget does. So we've gone through and eliminated or deferred expenses.
I can see the live stream now on YouTube.
Quite a bit. We could do more on the expense side. You know, defer more maintenance costs, defer more equipment purchases, but it's not eliminating those. It's pushing them out a year or two. So we can make those calls during the year. You know, we can always amend a budget 3 months or 6 months in, if we have better data according on the revenue or the expense side. But this was kind of a starting point. That's, you know, what I'd like y'all to discuss tonight is what projects, if any, need to come out. What this budget says is that they don't need to come out. We can do the projects that are in the budget with the worst case scenario revenue stream and make it through. We significantly deplete tourism revenue fund balances and the capital projects fund balance, but the general fund stays pretty flush or pretty flat, and we don't tap into the disaster recovery. We just are trying to get y'all's input and direction on what you might think a draft 3 looks like, but a draft 2 works.
Randy, do you?
No, I called Philip earlier. I mean, I'm used to what would be referred to as waterfall charts. You have X amount of money in the bank, and we have X amount of expense, right? So there are capital projects that are already underway, and you know, you wouldn't have finished a project and not finish the project. There's projects that can be deferred, and there's other major costs that can be cut. What I'm used to presenting is, and I'm not criticizing what's been done, but it's a calendarized flow of what happens to cash over time, and whenever you hit the wall. I mean, when do you just say, we don't have more money? I'm not personally comfortable taking the optimistic side that says, you know, we have enough money in the bank, we're not gonna have to touch disaster funds, because we simply don't know. I mean, we don't know about revenue, we don't know about storms. Remind everybody, there are council members that were here before I was elected to council that were arguing about the dependencies that this city has built into their budget for prior years on tourism dollars. Nobody could have predicted this. There were comments like, when's the next storm gonna hit? You know, our issue here is looking at all costs. And by the way, I'll add personnel into that, right? We can't have a conversation here where every business in the world is being challenged on personnel costs without adding personnel costs to the list, going through responsibly with essential, non-essential, like every business is doing right now, and working our way down from that cash balance to a point where we feel this city's finances can sustain this for however long this is gonna take. And that's cold reality.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with any comments at this point, but you gotta start somewhere.
I agree.
And we've looked and when we, the three of us have certainly looked at both sides of the equation. I was just starting here because this is such a driver for whatever you're assuming.
But to the mayor's point, the only thing we control sitting up here is cost. That's it.
I don't disagree with that, but we gotta start somewhere. Susan?
I think maybe if it was just titled differently to say worst case scenario,
I wish we would feel comfortable saying that.
that might.
That's, and that's part of the issue is,
Mhm.
I mean, we met a month ago at the rec center. And, you know, think about what's happened in a month. It's like, you know, we told Debbie to say, you know, why don't you just run a couple of scenarios of 25% and 50% reduction? Surely that'll be fine. And here we sit a month later and we're saying, let's just assume we don't get anything for a few months. Not about closing businesses, just about our receipts. Go ahead, Susan.
Well, I think that initial 100% reduction from March to July is truly, obviously a worst case scenario, I think. I mean, in terms of revenue, it can't get worse than nothing. So,
Unless we start stroking checks, yeah.
and I doubt that that's going to be the case because I foresee that we will be opening up at least 2 short-term rentals at some point before July.
Maybe.
Before the start of July.
Oh,
Unless,
okay.
I mean, that, I would.
There's an assumption, yeah.
That, I think that that's a fairly logical assumption, and I'm pretty conservative and I follow the news. That we would.
Okay.
That we would not that we would continue at 100% reduction, I think would be surprising.
Rusty, sorry.
Yeah, hot off the press, I mean, just before this meeting started, I pulled off of the website, WISTV, and Governor McMaster believes business and activities in South Carolina can safely resume in June, late June, is what he's saying now. You know, that's hot off the press. If he's having a press conference in just a few minutes, that's probably what we're gonna hear him say, if we can believe what WIS reported. I mean, I think when we look at this, I mean, we've got to assume the worst, and I agree. I think we're looking at expenses, we've gotta look at every expense that we've got and see what we can do. But in regard to tourism, if we're starting a budget process, you know, starting the planning that you would do in any good business and any good municipality, you've got to go ahead and put some numbers out there, knowing there's a fluid situation that we can go back and change and amend if we need to, for better or worse. But it is such a, I mean, this is such a unique situation we're faced with. It's like an ongoing hurricane, you know, in a lot of ways, except that we have food to eat, we have power, you know? And, so I think we just gotta look at the big pieces of it today, get in place what we want it to look like to begin with from the documentation, and then, you know, if we need to get into the weeds and attack some of the expenses today, including personnel, I'm willing to do that also as a council person.
Does John have anything he needs to jump in on? I don't know if he was trying to come in or not.
He is here, let me see. John?
No.
Doesn't have anything to add.
Okay.
Still very low to say.
Yes.
Ryan? Oh, sorry. No?
Go ahead, John.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I would say that, I think that, yeah, for between now and July, to Councilman Smith's point, 100% is obviously worst case, like, worse. The question is the realistic worst case scenario? My initial reaction and kind of digesting all this information was, this is a good start for us. Right now, it feels like it's not, there's, we can imagine scenarios that are worse than this probably, if we just announce imagination at this point. But, this feels like to me, a good conservative start for us to look at what do we think is likely to come in.
Yeah, thank you, John. So, you know, when we've had these conversations, Debbie, Desiree, and I, you know, worst case, best case, this could get on either side of it, you know, to this whole conversation about throw your first dart and let's have a conversation about where we're gonna get into some expenses before we go much further here. But, I mean, we absolutely had to have a starting point for revenue, so, anyway, or Ryan, sorry.
Like I said, that is a good starting point. I think our whole conversation may change in 4 minutes.
Yeah.
Right.
When the governor comes out and states that he's gonna extend this thing through May 15th, supposedly. So, I mean, we may have to go through and, you know, like I said, our revenues are one thing, it's throwing a dart at a moving target. And we need to really focus on what everybody's talking about now is, are these expenses? Let's look at the essentials. It's essentials and non-essentials. You know, how many times has that been said? Let's get back to that.
Yeah. Okay.
So just a thought, do we dive deeper into the expenses to see what further cuts we could do and then come back to the revenue side of things?
Certainly can. Is that preference?
What-
Yes, ma'am.
I'd just like to say, for the people who are following this closely now, but maybe don't usually follow our budget, that closely, we are definitely, dependent on tourism revenue to fund a large portion of our budget. However, over time, we traditionally carry over fund balances, so I don't want the people who are just starting to really pay close attention to think that we don't have reserves that we can draw on. The situation is, while extremely difficult, is not maybe as dire as it may come across.
No.
Because we still have a sizable disaster fund, as Debbie referenced, and we have fund balances of tourism money that we carry over from year to year. I think for these kinds of scenarios, I mean, not that we envisioned a pandemic, but for recession and that kind of activity.
Yeah. Mayor?
No, I think that's exactly right. I've heard all kinds of things about the city and the fund balances and stuff. We are, I'm not gonna say financially sound, but we can carry ourselves. The end of the year is June the 30th, then starts the next fiscal year. We do have things that we have to take care of. Public safety building is the one big one that we have to take care of. Everything else is something that we can defer on, or doing project pieces of. But as Ryan said, in the next 4 hours or 4 minutes, we just don't know. But the one thing that we do have to take care of is that public safety building. Everything else, I think, could be on the table.
No, I think it's fair. All right, everybody good to go on the expense side of the house? So let's look at, this one is the changes to the fiscal 20 forecast. And it's got a little bit of revenue in here because we have to, but then if we want to focus on the expense side, let's do that. So, top part of this particular page is the revenue assumptions. So just bypass that for a second because it's all built from that, those revenue assumptions we just looked at. So focus on the bottom part of this page. So for those of you following along at home, we're looking at changes to fiscal year 20 forecast, fiscal year 20 expense reductions to offset COVID-19 revenue decline. There's a whole section, about 7 or 8 items there where Debbie, Desiree, and I have gone through and with department heads looking at expense cuts where we could make them. So first line items of personnel. We put obviously a hiring freeze in for the open positions that we have. We don't have a merit that would have been effective 1/1/20. So we've taken that out, so that comes up to $138,600 roughly. We have reduced professional and contracted expenses through a number of different departments. That's $225,000. You can see the rest of them there. I'll just stop and let you ask questions around some of those, or what, Susan?
I don't understand the fiscal year 20 merit being explained. That's not something that was already.
It was in the budget, and we're saying that's between open positions. So for personnel, the particular personnel line item, that's a combination of open positions that we're not going to fill and the merit.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, I didn't explain that well.
I gotcha.
Yeah.
It's not that people who are in positions are still getting their fiscal year 20 merit raise, right?
Correct, they are not.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't explain that well at all.
They're not.
They're not, that's what I said. Randy?
Yeah, just for clarity, no fiscal 20 merit, which is half of this calendar year.
Correct.
So, but those were not awarded already?
No.
They haven't.
They hadn't been. It
and no-
typically happens in the spring.
Oh,
It
okay.
would have happened in this period, and
Okay.
with everything going on, we've just suspended that for this year.
Okay,
It would have
I-
been paid proactively as of, like,
1/1.
Chair Towns had said, January 1, but we've suspended that for this year.
So nobody has yet received it.
There's a rest of the question. No fiscal 21 COLA, but fiscal 21 2% merit.
Yeah, we're gonna get there.
Okay, but in terms of across the board, just calendarizing this, we did not remove all of the merit for fiscal 21.
Correct, cause again, that one would be effective 1/1/21, and it's just a placeholder right now, that's an item.
So 6 months of calendar 21 still has in it a 2% merit.
Correct, that we'll look at when we get to 21 budget. Yes, you're right. Yes, ma'am.
But fiscal year 20, the way we did it was all merit.
Correct,
So they're essentially saying nobody was getting a raise
correct.
for fiscal year, starting in fiscal year 20 through the rest of this year.
Correct.
Okay, I'm not sure how I feel about that. Does that fit with what most government entities are doing right now?
We felt it was a reasonable response to the situation. We think that there are 22 million people that are unemployed, with so much uncertainty. What we're trying to do is cut expenses, discretionary expenses that make sense, and try to protect everybody's job as much as we can without having to cut hours or furlough anybody. So that was a decision that we made as a team with the department heads, led by me. I mean, I think it's reasonable. Certainly, if things improve during this year and the next year, it's something that we should revisit. Again, but going into this from a worst case scenario perspective, I think it's something that's happening across the board where you're just rethinking those increases at this point.
Mayor.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Going to Susan's and Desiree's reply. Boeing, close the doors. MUSC, massive layoffs.
And pay cuts.
And pay cuts. We value our employees, but right now, we're trying to survive. And that's what this is keeping our doors open without laying people off.
Yeah, and just real quick comment to that. Desiree has talked to 3-4 counterparts around the Low Country, and Susan, to your comment, and you can see, the little daily flash we get from MASC, saw one today, I can't remember which city it is, cutting expenses, furloughing employees. The gambit has been, it was a Surfside, I think, totally, shut down all non-essential employees, furloughed everybody to where we're trying to cut and hang on as much as we possibly can with these assumptions that we've made. The assumptions get worse, then we're gonna have to go down a different path at some point, Desiree, not to speak for you, sorry.
No, you're good.
Sorry, Kevin.
Sure.
Yep.
So regarding the hiring freeze, how does that, are we good for fire and police? Are we still needing positions, and should we, if we're needing those two, do we put a freeze on those?
Yeah, so we've got a freeze on everything right now, and the only open positions we have are 3 or 4 on the police side that are beach service officers, I think.
We have a captain position in the police department, we have 2 patrol officers, we have a detective, and we have a number of, beach service officers, positions that are open. All of that has been frozen for the time being. Our assumptions assume, hiring some of those essential positions starting in October of this year. Should our projections and our assumptions play out to be true, and we can do that. But as of right now, from now through October, we would be having, a hiring freeze. Which would be, I guess from the police side, it'll be challenging if we have a hiring freeze and the beach is open and, it's back to normal, we're gonna have to rethink that. We obviously want our police department to be, to be able to respond to the demand and services that we'll see in a summer, where we probably would have a lot of activity should those restrictions be lifted.
I mean, Kevin, this is one of those where those revenue assumptions are feeding into this hiring freeze. So if we think, the switch is gonna get flipped in June, July, whatever. I mean, those positions, particularly in the police, have been open for quite a while. So we just felt like we could do without them, making the assumptions on the revenue budget side.
No, and I'm
Oh,
okay, I'm
go ahead.
sorry, I'm
No.
okay with the thought of the freeze, I just didn't know if we had vital positions that
Yeah.
needed to be filled.
Good
I just
question.
would stop it.
And that's one of the
Right.
things, if we're gonna be mandated by the state that we have to open up the beaches, or we have to open up accesses, or we need to rely on the state to help patrol those areas, because obviously we do not, as we know, we've fallen in a situation before, that we need to call on the county, we need to call on the DNR, we need to call on, SLED to help enforce those regulations, because we don't have the manpower to do it.
Yes, sir, Jimmy?
Also, if y'all notice, the biggest line item as far as these reductions, expenditures, is the CVB, and that's a variable,
Right,
depending on revenue.
right,
But that's $264,000.
yeah,
And that's assuming, on the conservative side, you're zero
right,
revenue.
on the revenue side, Mayor.
Yeah, thank you. As Ryan said, I've noticed that on Sullivan Sound, they're using the sheriff's department a lot on their, checkpoints.
Yeah.
We have not relied on them at all, but come summertime, our beaches will be inundated. And I think we should reach out to the sheriff's department for help during this summer, cause it's the tri-county that we're
Yeah.
dealing with, not vacation.
Randy?
Quick side on the expense side of police, it is also in the budget that ATAX transfers to cover seasonal hiring of public safety officers is something we do. I mean, we fund a portion of that with dollars that come in because of tourism. Second piece is the one control point that we do have that we've never managed to pull the trigger on is parking control. We've talked about consistently getting more of the tourists or day trippers to go to the county park. We have the ability to limit the amount of people coming to the beach that also has an impact on the requirements on both public works and public safety if we have a willingness to do that, right? I mean, the one thing keep in mind, the more that we can push towards Front Beach, towards the businesses, towards the parking that's available through the county and put the onus on the county, we do have that ability.
Susan, yes,
I was wondering about if there's anticipation that we can capitalize on federal funding that, in this next wave of COVID response funding that's available. I think I'm hearing is gonna be open doors for municipalities to tap into. So I don't know if anybody's.
I hope
looked
that's a
at
fact,
or-
yeah.
I
Well,
know that's not really ironclad at this
Right.
point, but.
Cause
We have been reaching out to try to get clarity on how much money is available, how is that money going to be distributed? Are there gonna be restrictions for that money for cities and municipalities? And we don't get a lot of information, there's not a whole lot that's coming out of the governor's office, on what those restrictions would be, when would we be, even expecting that money? So there's, again, so much uncertainty, we don't know how we're gonna be potentially impacted in a good way from those funds. We don't know yet.
yeah. Bales, Rusty, you good?
I'm good.
Okay. So the line item that says reduce other operating expenses, all departments, that's where we sat with all department heads and came up with 328,000 roughly in expenses that could either be eliminated, pushed to next year, reduced, any combination thereof. Other expense questions on 20 at this point, and we'll look at the forecast.
If you don't mind answering, had the 50% of that balance on that line item, Marina Enterprise Fund, what does that $189,000 entail?
That is mostly the real estate, consultant fee that we just forecasted that deal is not gonna be done by June 30, so it's rebudgeted in 2021.
Is that much?
That's the lion's share of it. There's also some other professional type expenses, I think. I'd have to get into the weeds to figure it out, but
Yeah.
that's a big piece of it.
Well, and the agreement that the city has with that group is 6% of the lease, the value of the lease. So until we know what that is, so this was I guess an estimate.
Another variable.
It's another
Correct.
variable and an estimate. And I just wanted to clarify that these are savings that we have identified from now through June 30th, when our fiscal year ends. But this is not a whole year, this is just this quarter.
And these are just savings that weren't already anticipated in draft one. So there were some, the forecast on the expense side in draft one was less than the budget for FY20. These are additional forecasted savings.
So I'm
Yeah,
just,
Randy.
the continued moose on the table, nobody wants to talk about, so we don't believe that apart from a hiring freeze, that there are furlough opportunities in this city to act the same way that every business is being asked to act. And I've had this conversation with Desiree, I've had it with Philip. I don't think it's council's job to make the recommendations. I think it's city administration's job to tell council what is essential, what is not essential. And I can't go back and answer the people that keep sending me emails and say that we don't have responsible actions beyond the futures, right? Because we're looking at future capital expense, we're looking at future hiring. Are we gonna have a real conversation around essential, non-essential, and treat this the way that the businesses on this island and the residents are having to treat their own businesses?
Yeah, so let me take it off Desiree for a second. Not that she can't handle it, but, so Randy, if you come back to, I mean, I hate to keep coming back to this page, because everybody was ready to punt this page and move on from a revenue standpoint.
It's the mystery page.
It's the mystery page, but it's driving the decisions to the heart of your question. So, let's take the rec center as an example. I've heard from citizens, you have too, we've all talked about it, what are they doing, why haven't we furloughed that crowd, as an example. If we assume life's gonna happen, some sense of normalcy in June or July, let's say June, just for argument's sake for a second, Randy. If we think life's gonna happen back to some version of normal in June, and we're gonna have some type of June programs at the rec center, and I can argue about social distancing, I get that. But that's what's going into our assumptions at this point. Something's gonna happen in June, we can kick things back off. Does that mean you're gonna have a full program at the rec center? I don't know. But if we are, then those folks are spending this month continuing to plan like they always would for the programs in the summer. And that's why, to me, these assumptions are so critical, because if you think about, you know, whether it's driving revenue or driving that kind of a conversation around furloughs, you know, if those assumptions slip, or we hear from our governor that we're not gonna open up until August, that's a very different conversation that we're gonna have at that point. So Randy, to that whole conversation, that's why we haven't done anything other than all these expense cuts, freezing, wiping out the merit. To Mayor's point, we're trying to save jobs and, you know, keep things intact at this point based on these assumptions. But again, if that doesn't play out, it's gonna be a very different conversation.
And I will say, I mean, furloughs may be necessary. I mean, we all recognize that. It just, to me, it seems premature to have that conversation when there are so many assumptions. When we're focusing on continuity of services, and if there is going to be an expectation, if we're using the recreation center as an example, if there is going to be an expectation from the community that the rec center will be operable as soon as restrictions are lifted and people have an expectation to send their kids to camp, obviously we're working on our end from an operational standpoint. How do we ensure that we do that in a safe way? People feel comfortable leaving their kids there. You know, we're obviously on the back end, we're working on that. But if we furlough a full department and then there's an expectation that the department is up and running by June 1st or June 15th, then that's not going to be possible. So I think that the essential and non-essential conversation is driven by the expected level of service that this community will have for the summer when it comes to the recreation department.
Just a couple points, and listen, it's not, let's pick on rec center day, that's not the point. I went through and looked at programs and I said, you know, with the best information we have available, what kind of programs could we run? There are programs we can run. There are programs we can't run. The last data that I looked at has about a 50% distribution of resident attendance or resident registration, I can't even think of the right word, versus off-island, right? I don't personally feel that this is a year that we're going to try to encourage everybody from hotspot across the bridge to come participate on an ATAX funded facility, right? So if the city and administration wants to work on programs that fit the residential community with an appropriate budget to go with it, that would be my expectation. But to think that we're doing business as usual, I think it's a $730,000 a year payroll. There's no, you know, we go back to what we know and what we don't know. There's no reasonable assumption that I can come up with that says we have business as usual in a recreational facility where the focus of the governor's efforts have been around recreation, right?
But Randy, that whole conversation is exactly what we need to be having here today. We've built all this based on an assumption that says, you know, we're gonna be some semblance of normal in June. Just assume that everything's turned back on. That may not be a great assumption, but that assumption's driven the conversations and actions today.
I just wanna make sure we discuss it, because frankly, I'm comfortable with whatever council decides.
Totally with you.
But to not have that discussion, then I don't feel like I'm doing my job.
I'm with you. Rusty?
Yeah, I just wanna say, I mean, this is all good discussion, we need to be having it, but I think we're gonna know a lot more in the next few days than we know now. You know, given the governor's conference, given what's going on throughout the country and some of the feedback we're getting from public health officials. This is probably gonna be a better conversation to have when we have our next special council meeting, in my opinion, which is next Monday.
Yeah.
You know,
I hope you're right, Rusty. I mean, we've been.
Get into some of this other.
Yeah.
Information or situations where there would be possibility of furloughs or something like
Yeah.
that.
And I mean, I hope you're right, and I hope we do have new information, but, you know, you're dealing with, you know, what's in front of you for the day, and you're making assumptions on when something may start back up and who you need to hang on to and who you don't, but, you know, we've been, 3-4 weeks, we've been going through these numbers, and you keep thinking, you know, every day you're gonna have something new that's gonna be, okay, now we got some clarity. I mean, I hope you're right. Kevin?
Susan might have been before me.
Oh, go ahead, sorry.
I would just say that we are actually not a business, we are a government entity, and there's clearly a role for government to support the greater good, and this is, I mean, I think we could get in the mindset of we're helping to support the greater good by keeping people employed that might also be to our benefit once we get back up and running. And if, in the worst case scenario, we can still afford to do that without furloughing, I would, you know, I think that's something we should consider seriously. And to Randy's point that maybe you're looking at the rec center programs and seeing a lot of participation by off-island residents, or helping to support those programs. We may see a shift where more people on the island want to stay on the island and have recreation opportunities available to them here without going into Mount Pleasant. That might offset that.
I have a question too.
Hang on, Kevin.
Mr. Chairman, so I'm not sure how furlongs work, but I know how layoffs are, but, and maybe they're one and the same, but if we furlough somebody, aren't we still held accountable for their unemployment amounts?
First.
And do we know what that amount is?
We do, yes and yes.
Yeah, we do, and, you know, the CARES Act would require that the city pay for the first 2 weeks of that employee, the employee that's been furloughed. The city is still paying for their benefits with the idea that they're gonna be reinstated, back to work after the situation passes. And I just wanna, I understand that there's a lot of interest in the community about speaking to furloughs, but we have to look at the numbers. If we think that we're gonna make the budget by furloughing 5 employees, it's not gonna happen. So I think that we certainly need to talk about it. I think we know that we may get to that point. I think again, it's premature. I think that there's a lot of uncertainty and our staff is already very stressed. So I think that although it does need to be part of the conversation, we have to be realistic about what it accomplishes at the end of the day. You know, furloughing a full rec department for 1 month saves the city roughly $15,000.
To be clear, any department,
Any
I don't,
department, correct.
yeah,
Right.
and I think if you went department by department, you're gonna find there's very few people in this city that can be furloughed. So let's, I am realistic.
So with the unemployment, cost, what are we really saving by furlough?
So the cost for the maximum per week, for a furloughed employee for unemployment is $326. So the city would have to pay that weekly per employee, plus the fringes and the benefits. And that goes out, it's typically 20 weeks, but now it's 39 weeks, according to the CARES Act. And then those employees would also be eligible for an additional, potentially $600, from the federal government. But I don't know if y'all have read the article that pot of money is, it's emptying out. They're running out of money. So we don't know if those employees, if we do furlough, if they're gonna be eligible, or there's gonna be any federal money available to them to supplement the unemployment that we would be paying for.
Right, Jimmy Ward?
First, I've got 2 points. First question is to the staff. Aren't a lot of those programs at the rec department essentially run as an enterprise fund, meaning that the tuition that's paid for the children to participate in the camp covers the variable cost of paying the instructor and all of the other associated costs?
It covers some, but that's certainly not all.
Secondly, I would like, within the next few minutes, to get this furlough question answered. We need to start making some decisions.
And what's the furlough question, yes or no?
Yes or no?
Well, again, I can tell you our vote based on the numbers, and again, back to the assumption page, based on that, we don't feel there's a need right now. And again, to Desiree's point, all we're talking about right now is 2 days through June 30. That's all we're, really dealing with. And based on those assumptions, Jimmy, to your exact question, we don't feel there's a need to furlough. Based on the assumptions, based on when we think things are gonna start, based on our fund balances, based on revenue flow, may not be zero, but it's gonna be pretty darn close, so.
I'd like to get that question answered. And I agree with you and agree with staff. But we just need to get that settled right now.
Yeah, other feeling, and again, thinking about just fiscal 20 right now, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I don't think we can answer that right now definitively, not today. I mean, in terms of a yes or no on furlough, I think there's just too many variables we don't know right now, and hopefully we'll know more in the next few days, the next couple of weeks or whatever. But I think it would be premature to just say yes or no on furloughs going forward.
I would agree with that.
With what we don't know right now.
And I would say, just to clarify, because I know that, people watching, the city has not stopped operations. We have focused on continuity of services. We are staggering some schedules to allow for greater social distancing in, offices. Certainly the rec center has not, they don't have any programs in athletics, but they've been focusing on other things, creating virtual opportunities for the community to participate. I'm not gonna ignore that there is some loss of productivity in every department just by virtue of the situation that we're going through, but I have been very vocal in focusing on keeping everybody active, doing things that we can do, shifting priorities and shifting job descriptions and shifting responsibilities through departments. Everybody's helping every department out. So the idea that people are staying at home doing nothing, it's just not true.
And I think to all this conversation, which is great, and we'll continue it, Rusty, to your comment, we're gonna know something in the next few days, and I mean, God bless, I hope so, but again, to me, and kind of to Jimmy's question, based on the information we have today and the assumptions we've made to get to this point, I feel like we're in a good spot, personally. Feel like we've got the fund balances to take care of us. We want people engaged with us. And based on all these numbers, we don't need to do furloughs. If there's a want to do furloughs, that's a whole different question. But we don't need to do furloughs based on the information we have today.
Willingness to discuss is all
I'm with you,
Yeah.
Susan, sorry.
To follow up on what Desiree was saying, correct me if I'm wrong, most people probably don't may not realize that the instructors that do rec department classes are, technically employees, but I would imagine that they are not being paid right now.
The part-time employees and part-time work has been suspended.
A lot of them are 1099 independent contractors, you know?
Mhm.
Right,
Correct.
so that's a whole set of people that people may think are, they're in a different classification of employee, and we're not paying them
Yeah.
right now.
Correct.
So that's, I think, a key point. And otherwise, if we have a worst-case scenario of 100% revenue reduction all the way through July, and we can still do that without pain and with the pain of furloughing, I think that our goal should be to not furlough.
Thank you. Mayor?
Mr. Chairman, just for a clarification, we are a business. We are a non-profit business. We provide services for our bosses. Our bosses are the residents. Police, fire, sanitation, building, recreation, last but not least, staff to run all these departments. So we are a business. We just don't make money. And what we have to do is watch the money that comes in, and we will tackle these different things as we get further down the line. And every 4 minutes or however long it is, we are all watching this like a hawk.
Desiree, does John have anything he wants to jump in here with, do you know? Sorry not to give him opportunity here.
John?
Sure, I'll
Wake
make
up.
one
Very hard to hear.
from discussion today. And that is that, number one, my first inclination is really closely aligned to what I've already heard, that, there's no reason today to make a decision that we need to furlough anybody from my standpoint. The discussion that I would like to see staff have, or maybe the recommendation, and maybe discussion that we need to have, is, okay, well, we don't know what to expect, this is a fluid situation, but what are the parameters that lead us to starting to consider furloughs? What are the triggers that get us to the point where we say, okay, if X, then Y, as it relates to furloughs? So that's what I feel like is maybe missing a little bit from the conversation. And I'll go a little bit on a tangent here and say, I will commend the staff. I think, that the recreation department in particular have done some things outside of kind of what they typically do in terms of helping the public safety department. And I would maybe encourage, right now, as we're still trying to figure out, okay, what does the future look like? I don't know what needs that public safety has with those openings that exist that would be feasible for existing employees to maybe help out with. But my 2 cents, if there's additional opportunities for existing recreation staff who maybe aren't able to do some of the virtual stuff, that maybe we look for ways that they can help with some of those vacancies that we're not filling because of the hiring freezes.
Yeah, John, great comments and questions. Some of the conversations Desiree, Debbie, and I have begun week-ish ago is exactly that. So what's, again, based on the assumptions, if something changes, what's the next hurdle where we need to take the next step, whatever the next step is? Furloughs, more expense cuts, push projects, whatever it is. We've started having some of those conversations around what is that next hurdle that's gonna take us down a different path. So I think you're dead on. Rusty?
No, I didn't have anything.
Good. Kevin, sorry.
I just wanna be on the record of no furloughs from me, and, I've always considered our staff to be our finest asset, and, we furlough somebody, we may not get them back, and so I think we need to wait on that.
Thank you. And Jimmy?
I just wanna make sure everybody understands that my question about furloughs was just this fiscal year.
That's right.
That's just a few weeks. And I would like to send a message to our dedicated employees is that, that's off the table today. And you asked me, you said you just meant 20, right? And I said, yes, sir, that's correct. 21 is another whole conversation.
Agreed.
But I'd like to give somebody a definitive answer so we come out of here and people, are not setting their hair on fire, thinking that we're gonna lay somebody off tomorrow. That's all.
Hey, Phil,
Yes, sir.
Is this
Thank
an
you.
appropriate place to have a more positive piece to this? The conversation you and I had about the council contribution potential piece, or are you planning on bringing that up? Cause I'm happy to table it.
Fire away.
Our mayor already doesn't take a salary. Kudos. I will tell you from a personal perspective, after wearing this mask for about an hour, I have a greater appreciation for people standing around wearing these masks and trying to look out for us. I don't need a salary for this role, right? And I had a discussion with Philip. I think there's times when people think we don't, sitting up here, appreciate what they're doing out there. And I in particular appreciate the people that are literally on the front lines protecting our safety. I'd personally take my salary. I'd love to see that go to the heads of the public safety and decide how to give some form of, recognition to the employees that are out there protecting us at this point. I don't know how anybody else feels about it, but I think, it's a personal decision for everybody, but, and I realize, by the way, that giant paycheck doesn't come until November 1st.
Yeah.
But if there's a way
Next fiscal year.
to accelerate that, I'm all in on that.
Mayor?
Just to clarify, I do take a salary, I just happen to donate it to Habitat, but.
Well, I donate mine as well, but I mean, if there's flexibility here and willingness, I think, that
Right.
recognition of the unusual time we're in is.
Yeah.
And by the way, I couldn't breathe, I was starting to get lightheaded back there.
That's why I had this idea, because I can't, it's hard to see out of these glasses, breathe.
Yeah. Rusty?
Well, I haven't received a salary yet.
So you're good to let it go?
Well, when and if I do, I'll be happy to donate mine as well. And I think it's an excellent point that, the people that we have out there on the front line, whether the checkpoints, all of our public safety people, even people in our public works, I mean, what they're doing is a fantastic job out there.
And I will say, a lot of their spouses and family members have lost their jobs.
Yeah.
So, I think that it's a great, time to just be appreciative, and I know that a lot of members from our community are appreciative of not only police and fire and public works, but everybody, all of our city employees that are staying strong during a time that it's just so difficult and challenging for all of us.
Well, I'd be more than happy to participate.
And it doesn't move the household budget much, so I'm.
You're in.
Philip?
So, yes, sir, sorry.
You just opened up public boat ramps.
Late breaking news, Governor McMaster opened the boat ramps. Nice. So, Jimmy Ward, to your question, I'm hearing mostly consensus based on the information we have today for fiscal year 20. Let's just keep rocking. No furloughs at this point based on our assumptions today. I'm hearing
That's all I want.
mostly approval for that.
So, I'd like to have a vote on that. Can we take a vote?
Desiree, do we need to vote on something like that? No.
No, I don't, it's not,
We can just have it in the minutes and.
y'all can have I guess you can have a motion, sure, I guess, yeah. I don't think it's necessary, it's just what I'm trying to say.
And I'm just, it's gonna have so many if-thens to it. If the assumptions are there, if nothing changes, so, okay. Jimmy, you good?
Sir?
Thank you for pushing that, thank you. All right, so let's look at a high level of our fiscal 20 forecast. To Jimmy Ward's point, it's only a few more weeks, months. So you've got this in your package. Left-hand side is revenue. So year to date, this is through March, so we're not seeing any effect here, as you would suspect. Year to date revenues just under 13 million, and we're only projecting a little under 15 million. Okay, this one is titled Review Summary Level Fiscal Year 20 Forecast. It was a separate tab in your handouts. So again, we've taken in just about 13 million through March, and we're projecting we're going to take in just under 15 million through the end of our fiscal year. Okay. Expense side, we've spent 11.1 through March, and we're saying we're going to spend 17.6 through the end of the fiscal year. All right, questions, comments on fiscal 20? one. All right, so let's go to 21. This page is changes to the fiscal 21 budget. It's broken out into a couple of different categories. So just real quick, let me run you through the big buckets category. So the top one is revenue changes prior to coronavirus. That's mostly from our workshop 2, okay? What you need, Ezra, sorry?
No, I think I'm gonna give, Councilmember Ward a copy.
Oh, okay.
And my mask, broke.
We got more where that came from.
I think I got it
You got it?
somewhere.
Okay.
Flip the page.
Changes to 21 budget?
So the,
Yep.
that's it. Thank you.
All right, so again, the top, and Mayor, this is gonna get into some of this project conversation. We're kind of dancing around a little bit. So, top section is revenue changes based on our workshop 2. The whole next section is expense changes prior to coronavirus. So most of that was out of workshop 2 as well, okay? And then the two red headings, not red-headed, red headings at the bottom are 21 revenue reductions due to COVID and expense reductions due to COVID, okay? That makes sense just as far as buckets of stuff. So let's start walking down through some of this, because I think this is where we will get into maybe a little bit different conversations. Mayor, your comment about projects that we want to continue. So what we've left in the fiscal 21 budget right now is the marina project and phase 3 drainage. Okay, and remember on both of those, we were going to fund those with a general obligation bond for the drainage and a revenue bond for the marina. And what this first line item here is for the revenue change for the drainage is a 1.3 mil increase, tax increase, to cover the debt service on phase 3 drainage. 260 something thousand a year. Again, so Randy, Mayor, others, this is where so let's say we don't want to do that. Not a good time, don't want to do phase 3 drainage. It's not really much of a savings because it's an offset, okay, since we're financing it. So we're not going to be able to cut expenses. It's just optics a little bit, to be quite honest with you, around doing a big project like that, given what's going on, if that makes sense. Okay. Next two line items are adding paid parking, starting in March of 21 for 21st through 57th and 3rd through 9th.
Phil, just quickly, were you?
Yes,
it's,
sorry.
it's so funny, you can't see who's talking.
I know, I can't tell. Smiling or giving.
Were you rolling the marina into that same thing, drainage? You mentioned it when you.
No, sorry, I was
Okay,
just.
we're gonna have a conversation.
Yeah, I was just saying, both projects are still in here, Randy. Yeah, this particular line item is just the mill increase for phase 3
Okay,
drainage.
thank you.
Yep, sorry, that was not clear. So next line item is the paid parking we've been talking about in the right-of-ways. That is about $250,000 for fiscal 21. So we've had conversation amongst some of us that how fast could we kick that off? I think I just saw today Sullivan's Island said not happening for 20. They're going to push it to 21. That's what we've got in the budget right now. There are some expenses associated with making that happen, and you'll see that the first line item under expense changes, add license plate readers for parking enforcement, about $100,000 in the first year expense number to get that right-of-way parking in place. So let's.
So, Matt?
Yes.
So I did bring up both to Desiree and discussions to Philip, what is the possibility of accelerating that? And if we did, how soon could we put it in place? And there's a couple of points to it. We have a really hard time finding revenues, and if I look at us compared to Sullivan's debate on paid parking is largely due to their parking situations around their commercial entities. That is not the situation with us. It is a strain and drain on our public services, from public works to police and fire, for the day trippers. Right, so our opportunity is not where we already have paid parking. That's a great discussion. This is a discussion around what we keep kicking the can down the road on, what happens mostly between 21st and 57th or 41st, however you want to look at it. Could we pull forward And to the expense item portion of that, that's capital expense, so it's not, it's not $100,000 absorbed in the current fiscal year. So I think it's a worthwhile discussion. I'm no longer on the Public Safety Committee. It was flowing through that as I understand it. It's a doable item if we chose to do it.
Yeah, and let me just say this real quick. Already in draft one, if you'll remember, is increasing parking lot and meter revenues. Okay, so that's already in up here, so this is the new. Susan?
If you are talking about adding paid parking to Palm Boulevard and
Correct.
other areas, I think while I'm supportive of that in general, I think we need to allow for it to sync up with, whatever our plan is for making sure that residents are not penalized, which could involve like the annual pass.
Yeah.
Residents' annual pass was distributed at the beginning of the year, so maybe, but we have to think out what our plan is.
Absolutely. I know Jimmy Ward and Ryan, all of us on public safety, Jimmy particularly, have been adamant. We need to figure out the resident piece of this before there's much more than just the resident piece to implement before we get implemented. Ryan, you jump in here, but I think the absolute earliest, if council came out today and said, let's, go fast as we can to pull off this parking. Right now, Debbie's got it in, assuming March of 21. I mean, I think you're probably talking an August kind of time frame is absolute early.
That's the question.
You either, even late July, early August.
Okay.
We still got some legal things that we have to, hoops that we have to jump through. I don't see it being a problem, but in order to expedite it, it would be the end of summer.
That's the question. Thank you.
Good.
John, I don't know if John has
Oh,
anything.
all right.
else to say.
Sorry.
No? Okay.
All right. So, and then we have a reduction in revenue just from the public safety building where the trailers are. We obviously can't have trailers and cars parking at the same time. So that's just a small number for that year. So expense changes from our last workshop, adding the license plate readers we just talked about for the right-of-way parking, moving the Waterway Boulevard path into the fiscal 21 repair. Again, Mayor, another project that, do we have to have it? If we're gonna do drainage, I'd say wrap it all together. Cause when Douglas was here last meeting, we talked about raising that and kind of helping that be some drainage control as well. Just an idea, these are some areas where we can easily start cutting expenses if we need or want to. Next line item, for example, add comprehensive drainage plan, $250,000. As monies become available in future years, our thinking was it'd be nice to have a plan and somebody tell us what the next hot spot is to attack on drainage, as opposed to planning commission with Douglas using their best guess of where we need to go next. So again, that's a number though that could come out very easily and very quickly if we wanted it to. Beach management plans, some of these are nickels and dimes, but we need them in just to balance our thing. Add cost to refurb the fire pumper. Originally that was going to be a lease purchase in I guess our first draft of budget. Now we're thinking we can refurbish that, so that changes the dynamics obviously around the cost of where that would sit and how we would pay for it. Then if you move down to revenue, again, we're not going to talk revenue assumptions necessarily, but if you believe that phantom page, this is what would happen to our revenue to it, a reduction of almost $5 million based on our assumptions. So, Randy, get into your question. So here's the expense reductions based on COVID-19 work that we've done. So line item for personnel, again, delaying hiring all the way out to spring of 21 for those open positions. No fiscal 20 merit, which we already talked about. That would obviously carry over and have an effect. No fiscal 21 COLA. We left in a 2% merit, which would be effective 1/1 of 21, just as a placeholder. Again, we start talking about numbers that we can cut out. That's one that's certainly discretionary that we could cut out. Debbie, of that 382, that merit is 120-ish, if I'm remembering right.
That's a 6-month number, so 91,000.
91,000.
12 months.
Right.
2%.
Thank you. hard to keep all the numbers right on the top of your head, isn't it? Jimmy Ward, again, here's our CBB transfer based on total assumption of revenue. Other operating expenses that we walked through with department heads. So talk to me about any of those or any other projects that we've just labeled in for fiscal 20. Yes, sir.
Question, please, sir. You know, we've done it, over the years, every few years it comes up and it's always brought up, and for some reason or another, you can't do that, belong to the state legislature or whatever. But I think maybe it's time that we start if nothing else, asking some serious questions about our obligation to the CBB. It's such a material amount of money, we might go nowhere, like we've done in the past, but I'd like to get the thoughts of council about that. If anything, lobbying, our state senator or state representative, this guy, about having some flexibility on that.
Totally with you.
Here.
Yeah, here, other comments on that? I am with you,
Absolutely
Jimmy.
correct, yeah.
Say it again, Randy?
Absolutely correct.
Yeah. It's a big number out of our budget.
Yep.
And I know we have to spend it, or we have to spend it on tourism advertising, right, Desiree?
Correct.
So it just you would just have more control over your
I'd like to
spend.
see, but there's a million things we could do with it. Number one, you could go to the beach. The mayor and I have had this conversation many times.
30% has to go for advertising.
Correct, so.
I know, but I'm saying if we change the law, Debbie's
Correct.
shaking her head,
Yeah.
to get the law changed.
Right.
That's the issue.
That's,
That's the whole issue.
That's the path.
I understand that, we have no
No,
control.
I mean, she's answering as if we don't change the law, but your suggestion, I agree, is change the law.
We don't have a beach,
Yeah.
we don't have tourism.
Ryan, make a note of that, would you?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
You
Mayor.
know, going to Jimmy's point, and something we've said over and over again, advertising the beach. If we don't have a healthy beach, like if we were Myrtle Beach and we heard that the beach was closed down because of high counts of whatever, that's
Bacteria.
negative advertising. If we have this beautiful, whatever we used to call it, Blue Wave Beach, and wide sandy beach with beach accesses, that's positive advertising in its own way. So, you know, to our legislator, that's advertising. Folly Beach, I think, does their own program. I think this year was $600,000 for the CBB.
For us?
Yeah.
Yes, we're
And so
creeping
they
into
manage
$600,000.
their own program, and if we could change it where we have a standing water on the oceanfront side of the houses with septic tanks, I mean, if that were to get out there, it'd be horrible. I mean, we need a healthy beach. It just, but it needs to be brought out.
Yeah.
It needs to be brought out.
Maybe it's an issue for later on, I just wonder if there's any flavor to discuss.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
Well,
Desiree, do you want-
I just wanna say, you know, recognizing the situation that we're facing, right? When things start opening up, we're gonna be competing with a whole lot of other places, in the United States for tourism. So I think that we need to think about the work that the CBB currently does to advertise and promote the Isle of Palms as a destination if we wanna recover quickly as well.
Well, and I think, to Jimmy's point, he didn't say this, but, you know, there is so much, Wild Dunes spends so much on advertising. I mean, we're certainly piggybacking on that. John, go ahead.
Yeah, well, first of all, I wholeheartedly agree with Councilmember Ward, and the rest of them. We should be strong advocates for changing this law. But that doesn't mean that we want to stop spending money on advertising the island. That's still, to Desiree's point, it's still critical and important. I have been very dissatisfied at the level of service that the CBB has provided to Isle of Palms. And so that's another avenue that's not a discussion for today, but since we're talking about it, I would wholeheartedly suggest that we as a council and as a staff look into moving in the direction of Folly Beach and garnering more control over how our advertising dollars are spent.
Yeah, thank you. Susan?
I don't have anything specific to say about the CBB at this moment, except to be open-minded about that discussion. But, similar have always, feel like we need to have more information about, specific to Isle of Palms, about tourism, and the numbers that generate from our specific economic activity, so that we can make better decisions related to tourism and that, and have a better expectation of what, I would like to know, like, how much money, there's just a variety of things. I think if we got a good economic analyst in here, that could be helpful to us around that.
Going. All right, let's look at, so again, all those assumptions, all those ins and outs from our workshop 2 to COVID work. Here's what our current fiscal 21 budget draft number 2 looks like. And again, this is Debbie's work of one page, wrapping up that whole big honking budget spreadsheet to one page. Thank you again for doing that. So you can see revenues, a little bit apples and oranges because we've got our bond proceeds in here as revenue. Okay, so we're saying 20.1 million of revenue for fiscal 21. That includes 6.1 million in bond proceeds for the phase 3 drainage and marina. Expenses, roughly 26 million. You can see our fund balances. So right in the middle of the page, you see where it says beginning 21 fund balance, ending 21 fund balance. You can see what that looks like. So, for example, the Muni A-Tax fund, based on all those assumptions from that magic page, you can see we're getting really close on that one, on state A-Tax fund. So again, it's not going to take much of an assumption change to take us down a little bit different path from a spending standpoint. Randy, you with me or not? You good? So let me just make sure you know or remember what's in the 21 budget real quick. So we still have the, one pretty big ticket item for us for fiscal 21, Mayor, to your comment, is to finish the public safety building. That's 3.9-ish million total project, or that's actually what's in for fiscal 21. That's cash. That's hard, raw cash. One of the ways we could save some cash is to go finance that particular expense item. Just an idea, just a thought. Rates are low. We could just do it long enough for us to see where our revenues are going to be. But that is, almost $4 million that we're saying we're going to take out of these fund balances to finish the public safety building, which I know we're all in favor of and need to do. But that is a big depletion of our reserves that we could finance another way. Randy?
Just ask Debbie for clarity for everybody's purpose and the public listening. If Debbie would explain, so if I look at that whole list, there are multiple items that require some level of debt service. Can you just explain again the difference, what goes against the city's debt limit and what does not?
So any general obligation debt would go against the city's debt limit. The last page of this budget is a debt schedule. And, as of FY21, including the debt that's already included for the drainage phase 3, the marina revenue bond would not count against the city's debt limit because it's being secured by the revenue, not by the full faith and credit of the city. So we have 10 million plus worth of available debt limit that we could use towards, it's well in excess of.
So said another way, the only item we're discussing debt on that would go against is the marina. Did I say that? No, the other way around, I'm sorry. It's the math, guys, I'm starting to, it's 58.
He's lightheaded too.
Yeah, no kidding, yeah.
The debt limit is not an issue.
Yeah.
For
But I wanted to make sure we were clear on what counts, what doesn't
Yeah,
count.
no, that's fair. So just to be really clear, real quick, so the debt we're talking about, the only one that would go against our statutory limit, if that's the right word, is the phase 3 drainage debt.
Right.
Correct.
3 point something.
Now, if the city borrowed additional money for public safety buildings.
That's the point I was trying to make.
That would
Yeah.
also count against the city's debt limit, but we have sufficient, we have.
And you don't have to borrow all of it.
$10 million, correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Available debt limit.
Yeah, Randy's, Councilmember Bell's comment
Randy.
was we wouldn't have to borrow all of it.
Right.
You know, again, that's an idea that 3 of us, actually Debbie, came up with, around, so that's almost 4 million you're talking about taking out of your cash for 21. You could do some combo or anything. Susan?
One thing I would like to hear you all talk about is the advantage of borrowing right now, just how good it is. I mean, can we expect it to ever be at this level of low?
Not without this many problems.
But before that, I wanna make sure, as far as the drainage outfall, the drainage, phase 3 drainage, Douglas brought up at our last budget workshop, and spoke a moment about the potential for opportunity with the multi-use path at the same time that we do drainage outfalls to raise up, while we are enhancing and improving that path, to raise it up so it creates a protection for property owners from future flooding events. That I think we should capitalize on that, especially if we are adding it into a debt limit that's gonna be paid for over an extended period of time. It just seems like a really smart opportunity, and I think it's worth discussing, and it's not, how much more is the added expense estimated at? It's not very much.
We don't
We
know
don't know that.
exactly what the added expense would be. We do have a proposal from Thomas and Hutton, who is engineering the phase 3 drainage project, and Douglas is on the line. If I recall correctly, I believe it's an $18,000 proposal for them to design that elevation and, give us an idea of true cost. We agree. I mean, we think from the staff's perspective, it makes a whole lot of sense to include it as part of the drainage project and do it all at once. And there's, the potential of just including it as part of the debt. Douglas, do you have anything to add?
No, that's about it. We talked about rolling, even potentially putting it into the project as a bid alternate. So, when it came time to do the construction, have the same contractor do it. And the expectation from Thomas and Hutton was that by a percentage of the overall project, it was gonna be a fairly small percentage increase over the cost of the whole project. But really, we would need to spend that money now to really get the estimate of what the cost would be.
Yeah. Mayor?
Douglas, raising that multi-purpose path versus improving our drainage lines and pipes throughout the island. I look at raising that multi-purpose path is good for certain sections, but when you come to the avenues, water's just gonna flow right around it. So it dams it for half a block and then water flows around it. Whereas I think if we had better ditches throughout the island with nice outfalls at the end of every 36th, 30th, 25th, 21st, and 19th Avenue, I think that would be much better. Money spent.
So Jimmy, just to, and I know you have a lot to talk about, but so I'll be quick. The project would be, so the outfall protection was designed to roughly 5 feet in elevation across all 3 of those outfalls. They chose that elevation because that's the point at which water goes around in other places and would inundate the neighborhoods. So even if you gave higher protection, it's gonna go through these low spots. What the project would do is it would raise, and they've looked at it, very roughly, it would raise several fairly short places along that path that are low, that would keep the water from going around
and going across the street. So it allows you to gain 1.5 to 2 feet of extra protection by basically plugging those short rungs of holes, if that makes sense. So it gets you, like I said, I think it gets you about 2 more feet of protection, which in the scale of storms is really significant. But so you get that protection across the whole backside of the island with fairly, comparatively small cost.
Thank you, Douglas.
Susan?
And I think that would not necessarily be an either or, I think it should be a both, that we should be doing both, to complement the whole plan and have it all working together, to protect property.
So, let me just keep running through real quick what's in the draft 2 budget. So, public safety building finish, phase 3 drainage finish, marina docks finish, refurbish the fire pumper truck, $91,000 for a 2% merit pool effective 1/1/21, $250,000 for a comprehensive drainage plan, new revenue from parking meters and parking lot increase rates, and then the Waterway Boulevard Path. So, some of the conversation we're having is great, and part of what we needed to get to tonight is, it's really easy, given what's going on right now, to pull your wings in and not do anything, and I get that. But boy, rates are low, banks are crazy busy, who knows if they would even pay attention to us to some degree right now, given what they have going on with the small business loans. But so that's the dialogue we needed to have tonight is, are you comfortable keeping those in there? Doesn't mean we've spent the money yet by any stretch, and we can certainly pull the plug at any point in time, but as placeholders, are you comfortable with having all that in there? Randy?
I'll just comment on the marina. I think it's not just the marina discussion. Are we comfortable taking on additional debt that is dependent on ATAX dollars, knowing what we know now? And this is another, as Councilman Streetman said, what we don't know today versus what we might know in a little while. The marina docks, as much as I want the docks done, I don't feel is a necessity over the next 12 months. I mean, that can's been kicked down the road for quite a while. It is funded in this discussion based on ATAX dollars that we don't know that we're gonna have. Right, so when you talk about doing debt service based on ATAX, I'm not personally comfortable, whatever that item is, increasing the load of this city's dependency on tourism dollars right now. The other projects, we categorically have to do drainage, we have to do public safety building. But I think, we need to take a step back and go, all things said, the marina is not a revenue generator for the city based on the leases. It is an expense drain on the city. Regardless of doing these docks, we've averaged about $800,000 a year of pumping additional money into the marina, and now we're gonna talk about taking on debt service with more ATAX dollars. I think we need to think about it. I don't think it's a decision today thing, but I think everybody needs to fully look at it and say, how comfortable are you, knowing what we know right now, which is not much, about where we're heading with this economy, taking in more tourism-based debt service?
Other comments or thoughts around, not specific necessarily to marina, but that's one of the 2 debt items we're talking about. One would have a millage increase. Mayor?
A question to that. The marina docks, as per the terms of the lease, requires us to maintain them. And going down there and walking over those docks, it looks like a disaster waiting for somebody to walk over, and we know about it. And I think we'd be remiss if we did not take care of them. And again, don't take it wrong.
I'm not taking it wrong.
They're horrible. Yeah, they're horrible. And I think liability-wise, that's what scares me. And I think we've got to do it. But at what stage? Do we do it all at one time? And as Susan said, I mean, there's money out there right now that is as cheap as you're gonna get it. We should use debt service millage and revenue bond monies, and let's borrow this money while it's cheap, and let's get the things done that need to be done.
So one other quick comment to it, the city is not obligated to dredging. That is not in our contract, and we should not be considering city-funded dredging in this budget.
And it's not.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay, I
thank
just
you.
wanna make sure.
No, that's fair. And I think, Mayor, to that, both of y'all's comments, you know, it feels like things are kind of teed up for us to, you know, there's momentum around to fix the marina, there's momentum around, you know, going to the phase 3 drainage. Again, I know it'd be very easy to tuck our tail and not do anything right now, and we're really not. All we're doing is putting a placeholder in the budget for those projects once we see where things are gonna settle. You know, we're not expending any expense to get us there. You know, once the fiscal year rolls over, we're not spending anything on July 1, and we wouldn't, you know, until we see if it's gonna be okay. But if it's the will of this crowd to put in, you know, a debt service millage and to have a revenue bond, then, man, let's pin our ears back and go make it happen. We've been talking about this for a long time. Susan?
I would agree with your comments and the mayor's. It boils down to a responsibility that we have to the marina to keep the public that uses it,
Yeah.
to upgrade those and make sure they're safe.
Rusty?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with, Councilwoman Susan Smith and Councilman Bell. It's the right thing to do. I mean, we've got these things, we've got a beautiful island here, we need to keep it up. We know these things need to be done. Drainage, my goodness, I mean, we've got that as other public safety building probably is our number one priority we need to address. And the marina, I mean, you know, we've gotta do things there to keep ourselves from having some sort of significant liability. I mean, it is a draw when we have the tourists on this island, even the residents. I mean, we go down and we use that as much as we can, but we don't need to have a dangerous place down there. So, money's cheap right now. We ought to be going after this and see if we can roll it into one and get it taken care of.
One thing, in the budget, we did include from the first draft a $334,000 to recode the bulkhead, something that we had planned for last year. Bids came out really high because we gave the contractor a very short period to get the job done. So we think that those estimates would come down, would go out for RFP. However, it is something that could be deferred. I mean, it makes sense to do it when the docks are out before the new docks go in. But if we're looking for things that could be done later on, it'll be a little bit more difficult, but it's not as critical as the docks. But that could be something that.
Do we have a current bid on that, or are we rebidding?
We would be rebidding, yes.
I mean, frankly, people are probably looking for work right now.
Mm-hmm. But if we do decide to go ahead and do it, it makes sense to do it as part of the overall project. But if we're trying to find things that could be deferred for an out year, that could be one of the things that we defer later on if we're trying to get that project budget low.
All right, other thoughts around what you're seeing in front of you for fiscal 21 budget?
Philip, just to come back to public safety building, can we ask for administration to come back and let us know, you know, what are the debt terms that we'd be looking at if we chose to do that?
Yep, absolutely. And not to put words in your mouth, Jimmy Ward, but you know, money's cheap if you can get it. And again, I'm telling you, these banks are run over with this small business loan program that's out there, although it ran out of money today.
Thank you.
So, yeah, I think we can. I mean, I think we do, you'll have some conversation. And Debbie's had a little bit of interaction with our bank reps, you know, around a number of questions, but we can certainly get more specific around if we borrowed X for a certain time period or Y for a certain time period, we can easily go have those conversations. Thank you. Yes, sir.
With our payment, you know, with our relationship with the banks in the past has always been excellent, that we, you know, it shouldn't be impossible. We should be able to jump ahead a few places with business like that we're gonna bring them.
Yeah, $3,904,000 for the public safety building. What was that clock that we had that showed our debt service and what we could borrow, and that was a pretty cool little tool. Somebody did a presentation one time.
That was,
Tryon, first Tryon.
But any banker would do that for us on this. Money's out there, and then we keep that money available, because we haven't hit hurricane season yet.
Yep.
You have, cash is king, man.
Cash is king, thank you, you stole my words.
Yeah. I know, and that is a big number, given where we are.
That's huge.
Yeah, given where we are and based on our assumptions, it's a big number that would be paid out. I think it'd be a wise research just to see what we find out that we could do.
Great idea.
So, so what's not in this fiscal 21 budget? Well, let me ask one more question first. So this comprehensive drainage plan, $250,000, again, everything right now is a line item in the budget. It's not money out the door, okay? And I know you know that, and I'm not trying to talk down to you by any stretch, but it's just, I think we ought to leave it in, my personal opinion. And again, if our assumptions don't play out, then we pull it out and don't spend it. But I think it would be a really good piece to have, and maybe we hear from Douglas or Desiree, either one, I think it'd be a really good piece to have, because we've got two other, right now, phase 4, phase 5 drainage that are really big ticket items, just based on a wild guess. And I think that would be money well spent to figure out where the next hot spots are. But again, all it is right now is a line item in the budget, not something we're saying we have to spend by any stretch, and it would be one of those discretionary line items that would get cut if our revenues aren't where they are. Randy?
No, I got a question of Douglas. I wanna know what miracle has happened down around Rusty's house where the last couple of heavy rains, we've had no water buildup.
That's Robert. He's poking around finding all kind of drainage holes.
Did you fix it?
No, but I had a couple of neighbors that did some things to help.
Nothing.
No, it's all legally.
All legally, of course.
Desiree?
So before we leave this page and this discussion about these major projects that are included in the FY 20 budget, is there any consensus about consolidating the Waterway Boulevard path into the drainage, increasing that by 200,000 and making it part of phase 3 drainage, and then we would be able to eliminate that 275 that's included, partially funded by capital projects and tourism revenue.
Desiree, wasn't part of that, some contingency on county contribution as well or something?
Right.
So this would eliminate I'm making an assumption, we're not getting county money. Here in the near term, Susan, I think money's gonna be tight.
We don't know yet.
Yeah,
That's
but
true.
the point is, it would eliminate the contingency and still get it done on a less than, expense item because it's spread over time in debt financing.
Yeah.
Or it gets part of it.
It's a good thing, Susan.
That gets a section of the path done,
Yeah.
not the whole thing.
Yeah, understood, yeah.
But
So-
I'm curious about the county, that pot of money is somewhat, like they have to continue to, maybe that pot shrinks.
It's gonna be a different story now, though.
Yeah.
My point is, it could be a
We just
totally
don't-
different story.
As their priorities for funding projects may change, and,
It'll be just like ours.
just like our projects are shifting.
Okay.
Our chances didn't go up of getting the money.
But I will say, in the future, those monies will be available, and the city funded roughly $200,000 of the phase 2 drainage project with those funds. So we could, if we're moving forward with phase 3 drainage, we have a shovel-ready project, we can then submit for funds for the overall project, not necessarily the sidewalk portion. So there's opportunity there.
Is there any possibility that DOT could pitch into that if we show that we are also protecting flooding on the waterway, Waterway Boulevard?
If they do, I will be very surprised. I highly doubt it, and that sidewalk is owned by, and it's our responsibility, so it's not into DOT.
Yeah, so we can't solve this tonight. Are we interested in, to Desiree's question, are we interested in wrapping these two projects together and using kind of a total number to take care of phase 3 drainage plus the Waterway Boulevard path to raise it?
Yes.
I think so.
Okay. Give me a word, you good?
I
Or
haven't
thinking.
decided yet.
Okay.
Okay, for right now.
Yeah, again, it's not money out the door by any stretch, it's just a path, if you will. I think it's.
So what would be a total cost with this projection?
Yeah, we don't have a solid projection cost on raising the Waterway Boulevard path. I think we're hoping, assuming, guessing a couple $100,000, which is a little bit less than what we have in the budget now. So you would take that phase 3 drainage from 2.9 to 3.1 essentially.
But that 200 is amortized over what period of time?
Yeah, I think we looked at, I think 15 years on this one.
So your annual cost over 15 years is roughly, for anyone whose head's working that way, it's pretty low.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to see what, I'm sorry, what those actual costs would be now, given the circumstance of the economy, job costs, labor costs, all even coming down.
I will say, I had a conversation with Kirby from ATM to that same, topic about the marina. They have a couple projects that are out for bid, and they're coming back in the next few weeks. So we're hopeful that we're gonna get a better, a clearer understanding of how those costs and how the current pandemic will affect those numbers, particularly when it relates to a marina dock project. So I'll let you all know. I'm very curious how those come back.
Yeah, but don't forget, we built Station 1 in the same situation.
True.
Yeah, you gotta
Yes.
make those same mistakes.
Correct.
Yeah. John, you have a comment? Sorry. Okay. Jimmy, did you? What else on budget? Fiscal 21, good conversation, really good conversation.
I think one of the biggest things that to realize is the fact that now that, especially given this scenario, the circumstances that we're going through, the situation that states have to be more dependent for themselves now, I think smaller municipalities and governments really need to start looking out and taking on a lot of these issues that they're not gonna see monies trickling down now. So, and taking on that waterway path and doing some of the things that we need to do and not be beholden to the county or beholden to the state, doing that, is we're gonna have to, if we want it done, we're gonna have to do it.
And to follow up on that, I think it's good for us to be investing right now and not only taking advantage of this time, but, putting back in and helping boost back up the economy in our own, in a way that benefits us.
Amen. I'm with you.
Good.
Good.
What else you got?
What else?
All right. Is everybody good?
Mm-hmm.
On budget 21, so we're gonna bring it to a council meeting at some point in life, so we can have first reading, second reading before we get to.
You don't wanna go back to revenue?
Oh, I'd love to. I'd love to. Beat you over the head. Desiree?
Yes, we have to have a budget approved by the end of June. The idea, we could have a budget with these changes prepared and presented to council for first reading at the end of the month. We're planning on having a virtual meeting, creating a space for people to provide public comment, because we are required to have a public hearing prior to second reading. And, we could have second reading at the end of May, or we could delay and plan on having second reading by the end of June, giving us more time to see what happens.
I think June. Stretch it out as far as you can.
Yeah. Again, hoping we have better, new,
That's right.
more solid information.
That would be our recommendation as well.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
3 years away from here.
Yeah, cause our last meeting a month ago feels like a couple of years. Yes, sir.
Could we get some, estimated rates for the, debt service and also the revenue?
Absolutely. What we've got plugged in, another assumption, is 4%. So I'm hoping,
Yeah.
I'm with you. I hope we are. Yeah, we can do better. But again, conservative nature, put in 4% just to run all the numbers, all right? So I know we're bumping up on 2 hours. I just want to introduce a topic real quick, if y'all are okay with it. If you're not, we can run like the wind and be done.
And then we'll vote.
Nope. So, I've had conversations with some of you, and Desiree and Debbie and I've had this conversation. I feel really strongly that we have a moment in time that new normal is who knows what. And I feel like we have a real opportunity on this island to take a step back and make at least have some conversation around structural changes if we want to make them. I think our residents would be accepting of that. I think as council, it's up to us to periodically review pretty hard what we're doing. So let me just run through a couple of things for you. I've got to take this off so I can see. So just quick review when we think about going forward from here. our general fund is roughly $10 million a year, about 60% of our total revenue. And again, we just ran through all this, but it's just presented in a little bit different format for you. I'm just laying the groundwork for something. Property taxes make up about 3.8. We didn't talk about increasing property taxes at all tonight. All we talked about was, a debt service millage increase. Business license are about $1 million. Parking lot meter revenues about $1 million. Residential rental license about $600,000. Randy, to your earlier comments, fiscal 21 total personnel cost is 70% of total general fund expenses. Okay, these are just factoids for you more than anything. We have 91 employees, as you all know. 19 of those are not in public safety or public works. Okay, so that's rec, general government, building. Missing somebody, but
Public works.
no. 19 are not in public safety or public works, so the rest are sitting in Douglas. Say.
It would be general government,
Right.
rec, and building and
Yeah.
planning, yeah.
Thank you. So of those 19 employees, it's roughly $1.1 million in salary. Again, Rusty, Kevin, and I, and I'm not putting words in y'all's mouth by any stretch. We've only been around this game for 3.5 months, so we don't know beans, and I'll be the first one to admit that. But it seems like we spend a whole lot of time, energy, and effort talking about those 19 employees and what are we going to do. And we just had some conversation around, if we do furloughs here and there, it does not make a dent in our budget. If we want to do something different going forward, we need to do something big and a paradigm shift. And I'm not saying we need to. I think we have a moment in time that served itself up for us to potentially do that. Again, this is an opinion of one speaking at this point, but we talked about whenever we last had a council meeting, face-to-face council meeting, we talked about having the College of Charleston come in and do some strategic planning with us, and that's still on the docket. Again, it's just a line item in the budget, easy to cut. But I think what we need to start getting to are some of the either harder conversations or conversations that we may or may not have had in a while. And I have zero agenda with this conversation. I mean, absolutely none. I'm just basing it on the conversations that I've heard in the last 3, 4, 5 months, that we keep having the same conversations, getting to no resolution, and maybe that's okay. But could we stop and consider some different service delivery models? We look around Folly and some others that do things different, not better, just different. For example, having one consolidated public safety services group, if you will, not separate fire, separate police. I know it's been looked at before around outsourcing household garbage and yard debris. If that's been more than 10 years ago, then I think the total dynamics have changed around that pricing. Is it worth visiting again? I don't know. It's just an example of what I'm thinking about. Rec department, we talked about quite a bit. People that might have voted for the marina in a referendum or the rec department at some point, and you say, you know what, that's a service the city's going to provide, and that's awesome. You need to understand whenever this referendum happened, it's not going to be a moneymaker. I think all the residents nodded their head and said, okay, that's great. Well, some of that's been 20 years ago or 10 years ago. Is it worth revisiting? Again, I'm not trying to drive a dialogue at all here, other than I just think we have an opportunity to do things different. I think new normal is whatever we want to define it, and I think given our revenue conversation and our reliance on tourism money, I just think it's worthy to have some of these conversations. So I'm fine to have some of it tonight. I think we ought to break personally and just introduce the topic and save it for some strategic planning conversations when we get there. I just really wanted to introduce the topic, but I'd love to hear any initial feedback from somebody.
I think so.
Yes, sir.
I first ran for office 33 years ago out here. It's the only office I've ever held. And the people were telling me the same thing today as they told me 33 years ago. They want 3 things from City Hall. Don't raise my taxes, pick up my garbage, and leave me alone. So, this is just simple words, but I appreciate you bringing up the topic and stuff, but when you're talking about consolidating the fire department and the police department, what does that involve? How much retraining is involved? What's the morale cost in this? if you talk about privatizing garbage, people tell me all the time that, I'm sure y'all have heard it, I'm not the only one, they're really proud of our public works department, what a great job that they do. And they really don't want that messed with. That's just my personal opinion on those. But, you know, I appreciate you bringing it up. It's always good to talk about it every few years, but nothing's really new here. Nothing's changed in 33 years, that I can tell.
Rusty?
Yeah, thank you, Sheriff. There are a few of these things on here, and I won't call them out today because I know we're not getting into the weeds on the discussion on each separate one, but there's two or three of them on here that I definitely would not want to see happen, even though I think all of these are worthy of discussion. But, I do think that, you know, we do have a perfect opportunity, Chairman Pound's, point, to kind of look at things in a different way and see if there are some of these things on our way forward ideas that might make sense for us in this city going forward. So, I think it would be appropriate for us to consider doing that. I hope we don't have a new normal coming out of this. I hope this is just an anomaly. You know, a blip on the radar screen that at some point we're gonna move from, you know, pretty quickly. But we just don't know. You know, again, we don't know what we don't know, but, certainly, I think anytime you look at any business model, business plan, municipality, whatever else, I think you do, as part of your fiduciary responsibility, need to look at everything and say, does this make sense to do a different way? And go from there.
Randy?
I gave Desiree a book about a year ago by Darrell Connor about change is hard, and the premise is you only change when you're standing on a burning platform. If we're not standing on a burning platform, then, you know, just candidly, the city's never going to change. And, you know, I would applaud any effort to look. It doesn't mean we do any of these things, Philip, but, you know, if we don't take the time now to recognize the burning platform we're standing on, and you know, the fiscal end isn't good, and I go back to Debbie Suck's comments last year, this is not sustainable. Right, we got hit with something this year that highlights this is not sustainable. We've got to take the time to rethink things, and there's things that Councilman Ward pointed out. You know, I can't put a trash bag out quick enough for, I mean, it's picked up like the next 5 minutes. I mean, those services are precious to this community, but there's other things that we don't do well. I mean, there's things up there, and I'm not gonna call them out right now, there's things we just are horrible at, and it's particularly in the area of real property. So I think we need to look at all of it.
Mayor?
I can be real quick. The first one, I think, you know, our police, our fire, our sanitation is unsurpassed. Yard debris, you know, I think commercial contractors should haul off their own stuff. For residents to do it out by the road, have no problem, but commercial people should haul it off. Consider negative cash flow. The rec department was never designed to make money. It's there as a commodity as a community center. Reduce services? No. Increase property taxes? That time has come. Sell city-owned property. We bought a couple lots back behind here a few years back. I don't know why we bought them, but
$1 million.
But we could take half of that lot and put it on the backside and sell it, keep the other half with the Public Works Department. That's probably a smart thing to do.
For parking.
New revenue sources, we're talking about parking. I think that's a smart thing to do. So that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, thank you. John Moy, anything?
I would say the lead-in that you gave, that we do have some strategic planning on the horizon, and I do think that will be a critical component to having really educated discussion about these things, and things that the kind of last bullet point of other ideas, there's a lot that we can do, and I agree. This is a good opportunity, maybe as a silver lining to this pandemic we're going through, to reevaluate some of the things in the city that maybe
it's just the way we've always done things, doesn't work anymore. And, so I commend the, without giving any specific reactions to any of those ideas, it has to be in a greater context of here's what we're moving towards. That's sort of a non-committal answer, but yeah, I think everything should be open and we should be very open-minded as we think about what makes the most sense for our city.
Yeah, I agree. Susan?
I endorse the idea of doing strategic planning, and I'm just gonna mention about the rec department that there's an unseen value that comes with that of bringing the community together, keeping a residential community, here in a balance with our, tourism community, and the value that you probably see also in our home values, property values that come out of that. That is a little bit more tangible, but in general, the rec department really is a focal point for the community, maybe not the entire community, but it is definitely something that is keeping families engaged here, and as well as, senior citizens, and there's a lot of value in that doesn't equate into the cash flow.
Yeah, I totally agree. And again, no agenda at all here. I just think it's worthy of conversation. So I'm glad to hear there's some acceptability to head down this path when we get to strategic planning. And I think, as a council, again, we spent a couple hours here tonight tackling some pretty tough budget stuff. But I think we're going to walk away very unified in our conversation, and I think we should applaud ourselves for having the fortitude to keep these projects on the list right now and take advantage of hopefully some cheap money that we have access to. And so I applaud you all for doing that. So real quick, I wasn't sure where we were headed tonight. I thought we might have been down a different path on fiscal 20 forecast and budget and fiscal 21 budget approval process. But we will let that proceed as normal through first and second reading through council meetings. Any final thoughts, comments, observations?
Yeah, thank you for putting a ton of time into this.
Well, thank the two folks sitting right there at the
Thanks
table.
to everybody that.
And thank you, Mr. Councilman Bell, for cutting our pay.
Oh, he's a giver with your money. Yeah. Any final thoughts?
We decided on that.
Any final thoughts, comments? Desiree, Debbie?
Chime in with a thank you too. That was a tremendous amount of work that went into that, by you all and all the department heads,
yeah.
And I'm sure others on staff, so.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, great evening. Thank you, folks. Have a good night.
John,
Oh, John, sorry. John,
do you have any final comments, John?
No.
John, thanks for participating that way. I know it was hard and I didn't think about it every time to come at you, so sorry about that.
Thank you, department heads.
Motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
Yes.
Do we need motion to adjourn?
Yeah, go ahead, Dan.
Thank you.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second.
Aye.
Good to go. Everybody in favor?